Shalom, everybody, and thank you, David. We really are honored to be joined again live by all of our friends from around the world for the last episode of our virtual series on the story of the Hebrew language and its unbelievable, of course, revival during the relatively short period of 100 years. We started this fascinating journey on January the 5th, which coincided with the International Hebrew date of the birth of Eliezer ben Yehuda. Our first remarkable talk was given by the renowned Israeli chef Gil Chovav, who shared the secrets and stories of his family. His great-grandfather, of course, was none other than Eliezer ben Yehuda, who is known as the reviver of the Hebrew language. Later on, we investigated the linguistic origins of Hebrew with Professor Gilad Zuckerman, who explored the notion of the Israeli language, a new spoken language which is extremely distinctive from Biblical Hebrew. The previous talk was a thought-evoking visual lecture from Guy Charette, who shared his experiences in Hebrew education through texts found in their natural habitat on the streets of Tel Aviv, like in textual graffiti, lost pet ads, and stickers. Today, we are thrilled to have our last guest in the series, Dr. Thamar Elam Gindin, for the grand finale of the series on the Israeli-Iranian deep philological and cultural connections. We would like to thank the thousands of people all around the world who kept watching time and time again, enjoying and sharing these inspiring and engaging programs. We would also like to extend our appreciation to the wonderful moderators from a selection of leading academic institutions in Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont. Esther Shorer from Brandeis University's Hebrew program, Vardit Ringwald from Middlebury College's language schools, Shana Weiss of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies, and of course, David Friedenreich from the Jewish Studies program at Colby College. Thank you to the Hebrew College and Northeastern University Hillel for your series partnership. This series could not have happened without our partners' support and participation. Thank you. I would especially like to thank Amir Tadmor at the consulate for organizing these enjoyable and interesting events. I hope that you have all enjoyed How to Revive a Dead Language in 100 Years. Ech lachiot safa meta b'mea shana. Enjoy and thank you.
If you haven't yet watched the previous programs in this series, I encourage you to do so. You can find links to the recordings in the Zoom, both the chat and the Q&A, and also on the consulate's Facebook and YouTube pages, both called Israel in Boston. If you have watched these programs, you may have already noticed that today's installment is much more informal. Colby's Jewish Studies program and its Center for Small-Town Jewish Life aim to make Jewish learning accessible both to college students and to people throughout Maine and beyond. One way we do that is by creating casual opportunities to engage with leading experts in a welcoming environment, whether in person or online. You can find out more about what we do and how we do it at colby.edu/Jewish-Life. I see that the ambassador is still on the video. Perhaps we can switch that out. Now we have his name there. In any case, let me invite you to imagine yourselves on the Colby campus. The snow outside is beautiful right now. It's not snowing again yet, but more importantly, it's warm inside as we sit around tables enjoying a conversation over Middle Eastern food. Better yet, let's imagine ourselves in Kfar Sava at a restaurant near Thamar's home, where I imagine that the food is even better. I'm afraid that I can't actually offer you any food, but I can help those of you attending live on Zoom to participate in the conversation that will take place over the next hour. Please take advantage of the Q&A function. I'll include as many of your questions as possible in our dialogue. For those of you watching via Facebook Live, Thamar has also offered to answer questions posted on Facebook after the program. Thamar, I have to start by asking you about your email signature line, which reads, "Your friendly neighborhood Iranist." What does that mean?
Right. My PhD is in Iranian linguistics, but I'm also an Iranist because in order to study a language, you have to read text. And once you read text, you become an expert on what's written in these texts. I like to say that I know Persian from Ahasuerus to Ahmadinejad, although I know a little bit before and after. And if the audience would like, I can teach the accent at the end. But my life mission is building bridges between the Iranian and Israeli nations and opening eyes on both sides to realize that the other side is human just like us. I do it by writing books. I have a blog that's a neglected blog, podcasts, part of it is in English, social media, general media, mass media in Hebrew, Persian, and sometimes English, and all in order to open eyes and, like Colby College, I want to be accessible, so I'm your friendly neighborhood Iranist, but it's a global neighborhood.
So it seems from this talk that we're going to be talking about not only a global neighborhood, but global languages and the interactions among languages around the globe. And I'm struck by the title you chose, Pajamas in Paradise. Now, maybe that could be a kind of upbeat way to imagine life during the pandemic. My son loves being at home all day in his pajamas. This is paradise for him, but I don't think that's what you had in mind. Why this title?
No, actually, when I chose the English title, it was about 10 years before the pandemic, although Pajamas at Home is Paradise. I chose it because the words pajamas and paradise, or in Hebrew, well, we'll talk about the Hebrew title later. They're both Persian words that were loaned into both Hebrew and English. The series is about Hebrew, but I also want to put an emphasis on English, and because of my expertise on Persian, we'll also talk about other languages. But both Pajamas and Paradise were borrowed into Hebrew and English through different roots in different times, and this whole talk is about languages and contact and loan words and how they fuse into the language, how they're borrowed. So it's just examples of two of these wonderful examples, which we will elaborate on.
So if we wanted to start back at the beginning of the contact between Hebrew and Persian, how far back do we have to go?
To the 8th century before the Common Era, to the Assyrian exile, where Sennacherib in English, took the Israelites to Babylon, but actually Babylon, Persia, Assyria, they're all names of the same place, just named after different capitals. Assyrian Empire was about the same place, the same area as the Persian Empire. Persian Empire is actually Assyria plus the Median Empire. So we go back to the 8th century before the Common Era. We start seeing Persian words in the Bible from the exile on, especially in Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Daniel. But we also see influences in other books. And then, so the Old Persian, which is documented from the 6th to the 4th century before the Common Era, infiltrated Hebrew through the Bible. We can see the linguistic influences on Persian, on Hebrew. In some cases, it's also syntactic, and we see many loan words in the Bible. These loan words actually are considered part of our integral natural language because they're from the Bible. So when you tell an Israeli, a native speaker who's uneducated yet, that this is a Persian word, they would be like, oh, wow, I never thought about it. It doesn't have a plausible etymology in Hebrew. So it's surprising, it's natural. Then,
so can you offer some examples that would make sense to non-native speakers of Hebrew?
Yes, for example, paradise, which we just talked about, was lent into English through Greek. Actually, in Persian, it's pari daisa. Pari means around, daisa means a wall. So it's actually a garden surrounded by a wall. It's always been a garden surrounded by a wall. And the Greeks took the protected garden to mean paradise, and Hebrew took a completely different meaning of the garden itself. In Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, Pardes is a grove. We have pomegranate grove, Pardes Limonim, in Song of Songs, and today it's orange grove or citrus grove, but there was no citrus in Israel back then. So these two words took one meaning from Persian and then had a semantic shift, which means a change of meaning in these languages. English borrowed through Greek and Persian borrowed directly. Another word which exists in Hebrew, in English it has a completely different meaning, is dat. Dat in present day Hebrew means religion. In biblical Hebrew, it means a law or a decree. In Old Persian, it's data, which is the exact equivalent of Latin data, also spelled data, which is something that's given, but a law is also given by the monarch, or a decree is given by the king. So it's actually the same word. And in present day Persian, it means both law in construction, such as the ministry of law, or court of law, or a lawsuit. It's all dod, but dod is also he gave. So we have both meanings of law and giving in this data. And the city that was given by God is Bagadata, which, if we go back to the notion that this whole area is actually one big, under one big Iranian influence, can you guess what Bagadata is called today?
I imagine you're talking about Baghdad, which I would always associate with the Assyrians or Babylonians rather than the Persians.
Right. And it has a Persian name. And it's a twin city of Netanya in Hebrew.
I can't wait until we can establish a formal twin city relationship between Netanya and Baghdad. That will be.
Oh yeah, that's a dream.
So I'm stuck on dot being religion and data being what's coming through our computer screens right now. What's the linguistic significance of that kind of semantic range that a single loan word can have taken into multiple religious communities or social communities?
Right, you take the same word, given, and this given is given different meanings in different languages. It's like a tree that branches, and then from one meaning it goes to the other. The word, like the word paradise, which is one thing in English, and Pardes is not completely, because they're both gardens, but has a different meaning in Hebrew. And we see that a lot, that words from English, for all the dirty words in English, all the four-letter words that I'm not sure we're allowed to say in English, serve in Hebrew as completely legitimate words. Jackie Levy once told me about Rosh Yeshiva, that's a Hebrew word in English, a Rosh Yeshiva, who was talking to a student's parents, and the student was, a little bit acting up, but the Rosh Yeshiva called the parents, and he said, well, he's acting up a little, but aval ze bullshit. And the parents, who were Anglo-Saxon, were appalled and took the boy out of the yeshiva, when in Hebrew, when you say bullshit, it's really, it has no dirty connotation. And also other four-letter words, like the F word in Hebrew just means a flop. So my commander in the army, when I told him that we had two girls in officers course who were thrown out of officers course because they cheated in a test, and it was called Fak Ba'aminut. for F word in credibility. He said, זה לא פק באמינות, זה פק במיומנות. It's not an F word or a flop in credibility, it's a flop in skill because they were caught. So words really, take semantic shifts everywhere.
So I'm struck as well, with your example of pardes, which in the rabbinic tradition does circle around to mean something like paradise in certain contexts, maybe because of familiarity with the Greek meaning or the meaning that comes within Christian Europe. But I'm guessing you can't call this talk Pajamas in Paradise in Hebrew.
No, well, if I want the notion of paradise, I would have to say Gan Eden, and it a little bit beats the purpose, because Gan Eden, well, was borrowed into other languages as the Garden of Eden. It's a calc translation. A calc translation is when you translate the words. Eden is a name, so you don't translate it. But Gan Eden is literally the Garden of Eden. And Hebrew would be Pijamot Bapardes, but that would miss something else.
Sounds like wearing pajamas out in the citrus groves.
Yeah. And citrus groves are not something we got from Iran, while the notion of paradise is something we got from Iran. The original language talks both about linguistic and cultural influences. And before we went to exile, when someone died, they would say Ne'esaf el avotav. He was gathered around with his ancestors, because they would put him in the cave, in the burial cave. And when there were only bones left, they would gather the bones, all the bones together in the center. It's a really physical description. And it's only in the Mishnah that we start seeing, Sofo Yoresh Gehenom, they end up in hell. דע מאין באת, לאן אתה הולך ולפני מי אתה הולך לתת דין וחשבון. Know where you're coming from, where you're going, and who you're going to be accountable to. So all this, all the notion of life after death, of the world to come, of reward and punishment after death is something that we got from Iran. Also the notion of good guys and bad guys in the spiritual world, because before exile, there was only one God. He was good when we pleased him. He was bad when we displeased him. And only after exile, we start seeing angels, demons, that's post-biblical, and hell, paradise, Satan, Satan, another long word that was a Hebrew word that was borrowed both into English and Persian. Satan is a word in post-exile, in pre-exile Hebrew. It just means an enemy or an obstacle, Satan. Only in post-exile Hebrew, it starts meaning a sort of demon or fallen angel, bad angel. I don't know if you remember, it was a very long time ago, but King David once made a census. And because you don't count Jews, a large large percentage of the population died. I don't remember now if it was 1/10 or 1/3, but many people died because it was obviously wrong to do it, wrong to count Israelites. In Samuel, it's introduced as Vayosef af Adonai lacharot b'Yisrael vayaset bamet David. The Lord was angry with the Israelites and he made David count them so he can bring a plague upon them. And in the Chronicles, it's Vayamod Satan al Israel vayaset bamet David. Satan induced David to count the nation, to make a census, so that God would bring a plague and all that. So paradise is also Iranian influence. It would be too bad to miss this. So I wouldn't call it Pijamot Bapardes in Hebrew, only the linguistic part.
So wait, just to clarify what you were saying there about Satan. Satan is a case of an originally Hebrew word that
Hmm.
takes on a new meaning because of the encounter with Persian, as opposed to a word like pardes, which never even existed in Hebrew, that was gan. But then the word comes into Hebrew to kind of add on another layer of meaning to what a grove might look like or sound or be called.
Yeah, we have gan, which is a garden. We have pardes, which is a grove. We have bustan, which is a Persian loanword in Hebrew, but I think it doesn't exist in English, which literally means in Persian, well, stan, you know, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Baluchistan, Khuzestan, it's all names of places. Same etymology, same Indo-European root as stand, stay, station, something static. That's stan. And bu is good smell or smell. Bustan is the place of good sense. So it's a garden with scented flowers or trees. So we have quite a few words from Persian to mean garden. So it all adds, they're different nuances of the same garden.
Great. So let me again remind folks who are watching along on Zoom to post questions for the Q&A. I want to throw out one of the questions that's come in so far, just to clarify what you were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of the relationship of the Latin do, dare, davi, datus to dat in Hebrew. Again, very different meanings.
Okay. The original Indo-European root, Persian is an Indo-European language, like English, like Latin, like Greek, like Russian. The original meaning of the root do or da, Persian took all the o and n, made it into a. The original meaning of the word of the root is to give. Data, if you add ta, it's like adding ed in English. It means given. So data is given both in Old Persian and in Latin. In Latin, it became the things given to the computer or from the computer, like data, information that's given. And in Old Persian, it became something, a decree that's given by the king or by the ruler, or in Hebrew, it became the orders given by God. So this is how that is related to data. There are many jokes about it, about words from the scroll of Esther that contain data. But actually, it's not a joke. It's really the same data as in Latin.
And what about pajamas?
Okay, pajamas, as you may feel, you know, words that were borrowed in different stages of the language have a different feel. Paradise is an integral part of the language, or an old notion, and pajamas feels newer, right? Or is it only in Hebrew?
It feels newer in English to me, but what do I know?
Yeah. Okay, pajamas is newer. It's from New Persian, the dialect that was spoken, not the standard Teherani dialect, but another very similar dialect. Pai in Persian means leg or foot. It's from the same Indo-European word as foot, pada, pedi, like pedicure, pedal, the same pedestrian, the same ped that means foot. It was pada in Old Persian, and it's pai or pa in New Persian. And jame or jama in the relevant dialect means attire, clothes. So pajama was originally leg attire or foot attire. And if you may notice, sleeping attire that's not pants or trousers, if I should speak British, is not called pajamas, right? It has a different name if it's like a dress. Both in Hebrew, kutonet, and in English, nightgown. So it's only sleeping attire that's pants. And well, this is something and it's not completely made up. It's something I thought of my own theory, and I said it in so many places, especially in Israel, that it's found its way into Wikipedia and became a fact. That when the British were in India, because in India, pajama is a kind of pants that are worn during the day. And what I said was that their trousers were not as comfortable as the Indian pajamas. So at night, they wore pajamas. And this is how pajamas in English, and in British, pajamas is written with Y, pie.
Somebody earlier in the Q&A was actually asking about the Punjabi connection to the word pajama.
Yes, that's the link. It came from Persian through Indian languages into English, and from there through the British that ruled half the world to everywhere else. Great question.
But wait a minute, but Hebrew doesn't have a just sound. How do you get pajamas in Hebrew?
Excellent question. Well, it has two answers. First of all, we have phonological fusion. When a word is borrowed into a language, it undergoes fusion. It can be very light fusion or heavier fusion. There's phonetic fusion, which is just, so we can pronounce it. And there's phonological fusion, where we subject the word to the rules of the language. And pajama can only exist in modern Hebrew. I said that Old Persian came to Hebrew through the Bible, and it's part of our natural language. Then both Persian and Hebrew were undocumented. Hebrew actually, well, it didn't really die, but it was mostly dead. And as we all know, mostly dead is slightly alive. It was still spoken by a religious elite. And there was also Aramaic, where words came into Hebrew from Persian through Aramaic and into Hebrew. And when Hebrew was mostly dead, words that were borrowed into Hebrew were borrowed by the elite. So they're considered high register. It's through Aramaic or through classical Arabic, which is high register, but not as high as Aramaic words. And then when Hebrew was revived by Gil's great-grandfather and his friends, actually what was revived was the morphology, some of the vocabulary, but not all, as we can see, because we got vocabulary from all kinds of languages on the way. But the phonology was not revived with it. And when Gilad Zuckerman talks about revivalistics, and I assume that people here who heard Gilad talk about it, one of his lessons from the revival of Hebrew is that you can't force the revival of the phonology. So classical Hebrew doesn't have j, but we do. We have pajama, we have jeep, we have chips, we have jeans. It's no problem. We have student. Classical Hebrew couldn't have a consonant cluster st in the beginning of the word. So words like stomach are in Hebrew itztumcha. It's an SAT word. Nobody really knows this word in Hebrew. But we add a prothetic aleph, an aleph before the word. Olchuk, I'm in the middle of a lecture. You go to Omer.
Mom, I just want to tell you.
No, you don't. I'm sorry. Olchuk lech leomer.
Those of us who have kids at home due to the pandemic totally understand.
I did what the task you wanted me to do.
Okay, so go do something else. I'm sorry. I got him a whole activity, but he finished it because he's very good at math.
So you were talking about phonology and how
right,
phonology seems
so we
to
have
be more valuable today.
And stadium, which also came from Greek, stadion, became itztadion in Hebrew. We have an aleph before, but in modern Hebrew, we don't, or what Gilad calls Israeli, we don't need that, because we can say we have, I don't know if it's the mouth structure or because the revivers of the Hebrew language were native speakers of European languages, we can pronounce these sounds without a problem. Actually, the same word, pajama, pajama in New Persian, pajama in Teherani, Pajamag in Middle Persian was also borrowed into Hebrew while Hebrew was mostly dead. You remember that we said it was borrowed into high register. Pajamag, high register, foot attire. Can you guess the word?
My Hebrew's not good enough for that.
I wrote it for you on the cheat sheet.
Yeah, I know. I don't like cheating. Remember that the test you just
Okay.
talked about before.
Okay, maybe in the Q&A someone will give the answer, but it's puzmak. It's puzmak.
So wait a minute, but you've got Puzmak coming in let me make sure that I understand what you're describing here. There are, in effect, 3 different phases in which Persian influences Hebrew.
Right.
One is so old that we just take them as Hebrew words for granted. So for instance, somebody posed a question, I don't understand your derivation of paradise from Persian when pardes is Hebrew for orchard. Why are you getting it from Persian words?
That's great. I love this question. So tell me, the person who asked, what is the etymology in Hebrew? What root is it from? Okay, you feel that it's Hebrew because it's from the Bible, and words that were borrowed in biblical times are ours. How can you say psanter is Greek? Psanter is from psalterion. It's not a piano like in modern Hebrew. It's a different word. It appears in Daniel as psanterin, and there's back formation. The in at the end was analyzed wrongly as a plural suffix. So they say, okay, so psanterin is plural, then psanter would be the singular. But when I say psanter is not Hebrew, no, but of course it's Hebrew. How can you say it? There's no other word for it. Pardes is Hebrew, dat is Hebrew, pitgam is Hebrew, egoz is Hebrew. And only when you think and say, oh, wow, yeah, it really only appears after we had contact with Persia. And it really has a plausible etymology in Persian, but doesn't have a plausible etymology in Hebrew. And then you realize that, oh, wow, yeah. Some of these words did undergo fusion, not only, we talked about phonetic fusion and phonological fusion. Pardes also underwent morphological fusion. Morphological fusion is when you take the word and use the local morphology, the borrowing language morphology on this word. So we have pardesim, the plural with the Hebrew. We have pardesan, which is someone who takes care of an orchard.
What?
And so we take the word pardes, which was borrowed into Hebrew, and we add Hebrew suffixes. It's called external fusion because we don't mess with pardes itself. We do it with other loan words. It's external fusion, and pardesim is inflectional fusion because we just inflect it, singular, plural. And pardesan is derivational morphological fusion because we derive a new word. And from that we have datot, the plural. In the Bible, it's datim, datei hamelech in Amosim. And we have dati, which means religious. So this is derivational. But there's still, until, I don't know, like maybe 10 years ago, it was only external fusion. But around 10 years ago, which is more than 2,000 years after it was borrowed, it also got internal fusion, and it got into the structure of hif'il, the causative construction in Hebrew, and we have hadata, which is what happens to our educational system, that it becomes more religious and it tries to make others more religious. So hadata is when you take the word, treat it as a Hebrew root, and make a new word out of it. Another Hebrew word that also has a Hebrew word. Notice I said Hebrew word that also undergoes internal fusion from English is tokbekistim. Now, I don't know how many people in our audience are Hebrew speakers and how many don't speak Hebrew, but Tokbekistim, do Americans and do you Americans understand, non-Hebrew speakers? Anyone understands what's Tokbekist?
I only recognized it when you typed it out for me, so you'll have to explain this.
Okay, in Hebrew, the comments on an article or like in a news site are called Tokbekim, from talk back. So a person who talks back is a Tokbekist. And there's also a verb from it. You see, we take three components from English and we glue them together, and it's a Hebrew word because you don't have it, Tokbekist or Talkbekist. And then there's also the verb letakbek, which means to write a comment on a news post or something. Guy Sharet mentioned dog walker. Dog walker didn't undergo this. It only went the phonetic fusion. What doesn't exist in classical Hebrew, but in modern Hebrew, we have no problem with it. But we don't say, אני עובדת בתור dog walkerית. We say, אני עובדת בתור dog walkerית. Dog walker is a dog walker. Dog walker does exist in English, right?
Yes.
Someone who walks dog. So we have dog walker, the feminine is dog walkerit, and the plural is dog walkerim, but the action is dog walking because it doesn't fit into the structure of a Hebrew root, the Semitic root.
So I want to go back to just making sure I understand the structure that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Old Persian influence through the Bible that we take just as being Hebrew because these roots are so deeply embedded.
Right.
There's the 20th century, right, pajama, which we don't even realize is Persian because it's coming in through the English. And
Right.
today there is an importation of non-traditional Hebrew language sounds. So as somebody pointed out in the comments, there used to be a just sound in Hebrew, but it long since disappeared. And now it comes back in pajama, which feels foreign.
We don't, I think there wasn't a j sound. There was gimel and there was r. The affricated gimel was probably pronounced as r.
Ah, okay.
Maybe in some maybe there were dialects with j, but actually the Arabic jim is parallel to gimel.
So, but what's happening during this middle period where we have puzmak with a z rather than the pajama? Why is that working differently in that time?
Because classical Hebrew, that is pre-revival Hebrew or Hebrew while it was mostly dead, was not able to accommodate that. Either they were not able to pronounce it at all, or maybe they were, but they weren't able to write it. Now we use gimel with an apostrophe to mean j. It's possible that people did say pajamag or pajamak, or pujmak, but wrote puzmak. We know at least about biblical words that they were voweled, they were vocalized. Vocalization was added a few hundred years after the Bible was written. So some of the words may have changed pronunciation. We don't really know if they were just not able to write it, to render it into writing, or if it was really not, if there was no ability to pronounce the sound.
So can you offer some more examples of how Persian influenced Hebrew kind of post-biblical? There have been a number of comments that are surprised at how early Persian is influencing Hebrew, words like egoz. But what happens post-biblically? Can we provide some more examples that might be perhaps more familiar than puzmak?
Okay, in post-biblical Hebrew, now we'll talk about words that unfortunately don't exist in English. In post-biblical Hebrew, Hebrew is mostly dead. Hebrew words infiltrate the local language through the scholarly elite. It's called a religious Sprachbund. Sprachbund means like a bunch of languages that have something in common. So religious languages, what they have in common is that the sacred tongue infiltrates the local language through the elite, but the local language also infiltrates the elite language because that's the language they speak at home. So we have in the Talmud or the Gemara, when I was going to a yeshiva high school in the States, we called it Gemara. In the Gemara, we have a lot of Persian words that are either Aramaic and came into Hebrew, or really Hebrew. For example, the word I think most people would know, most Hebrew speakers would know, gushpanka. You know what's gushpanka in Hebrew?
Gushpanka, that's kind of like a government decree or something?
No, gushpanka is maybe credibility. I'm not sure how what's the exact English translation, but for example, when Meron is greeting us, he gives us state gushpanka. You know, they make our event a little bit more, you know, gives an air of more official, more. It could also be something that gives, I think that gives credibility. And it comes from Old Persian, angushta, which means seal of approval. Okay, thank you, seal of approval. Thank God for Meron. And I like it that he says seal of approval. Why? Because angushta is a finger. Pawan is from the root pa, which also exists in other Indo-European languages in words like patron, which is protection. And angushta pawan is a ring. The ka is a diminutive suffix. It makes it little. Something little that protects the finger. And what do kings have on their rings?
Seal of approval.
A seal of approval. So that's gushpanka in Hebrew.
So there's I want to give kudos to the person who posted Angush Pawan into the text before you got there. And I looked at it and said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but thank you for explaining it, Thamar. But let me also throw out another question here. Is karpas another example of a Persian loanword?
In Persian, we have karafs, which is celery. But yeah, it's similar. And here karpas also shows us phonological fusion, because in Hebrew you can't have this consonant cluster, karafs, at the end of a word. So you need to separate the syllables differently. You can't do karafs. And because you separate the syllables, karpas, you need to put a dagesh in the pay. You can't say karfas, because after shva, after a silent shva, shva, non-mobile shva, you need to put you can't have an affricate, you need to have a plosive. You can't have an F, you must have a P. So karpas shows this phonological fusion of karafs.
So I have a question here that takes us back to modern Persian, Farsi.
Please don't say Farsi, please, please. Saying Farsi is like saying Israeli. And I know Gilad Zuckerman says Israeli instead of Hebrew, okay? But the Academy of Language and Literature, of Persian Language and Literature in Tehran, asked that the language not be called Farsi in English, because when you say Farsi, you disconnect it from its long, rich heritage. It's Persian. Yes, what about Persian?
Thank you. I intentionally used that term because somebody was asking about the relationship between Persian and Farsi. I wasn't aware of that distinction, so really grateful for that. But the example that you gave of a modern influence came through English. I can't imagine whoever used the term pajama first in Hebrew realized that it was a Persian loanword. Are there any slang Hebrew words today that came directly from Persian by Iranian Jews?
No, they're all borrowed. Some are borrowed through Arabic. Some are borrowed through English, some through Russian, through Ladino, through Turkish. A word that both Persian and Hebrew got is kiosk. In modern Persian, kiosk is a vending machine. In Hebrew, kiosk is like a small store that sells like sweets and stuff like that.
That sounds like kiosk
but-
in English.
Yeah, but in Middle Persian, kushk was a palace. But because the first kioskim had this roof that looks like a palace, they were called kushk. And also when the Turks borrowed Persian words, they usually downgraded them. Like taking Padshah to Pasha. Padshah is king. So they took the king and made it a little bit smaller. Turkish borrowings from Persian is a total mess. Yes, that's a totally different lecture.
Well, I'm struck thinking about some of the things that you and I discussed in our preparatory conversation about the ways in which certain kinds of linguistic borrowings are high register and certain kinds of borrowings are low register. And this Turkish example seems to be one of them. Could you say more about when borrowings become elevated speech and when they become kind of lowbrow?
Right. The earlier they're borrowed, the more natural they feel. And it also depends where they were borrowed from. For example, Hebrew words in English are borrowed mostly either from the Bible, and when they're borrowed from the Bible, they're high language, like cherubim, kovim, which is a kind of angels, like Leviathan. In Hebrew, Leviathan is a whale. In English, Leviathan is just something big. Behemoth. They're high. Shibboleth. Shibboleth in Hebrew means an ear of wheat. In English, it's like a password. When I was in high school in the States, I was the best in my class at vocabulary, but I didn't know the basic vocabulary because I only learned from the little vocabulary booklets. So I used words like effrontery because I didn't know how to say chutzpah in English. Anyway, shibboleth is a password because in the Bible, when they tried to tell the people of the tribe of Ephraim from the others, they asked them to say shibolet, but the tribe of Ephraim couldn't pronounce shin. So they said something like sibolet or shibolet or I don't know, something like that. And this is how they recognized them. So it came to mean something like a code word or a password in English. And these are high register words because they are from the Bible. But words like chutzpah, which I think did enter the dictionary in English, or like mazel tov, are words that were borrowed through Yiddish. So we have two more terms I want to introduce are superstrate and substrate. A language, most languages have some kind of hierarchy. So the Bible is above English. That's why it's higher register. But Yiddish or other immigrant languages are beneath. So their influence is from the bottom. Or words in another use for substrate is words that the language conquered. So when the English language conquered Indian languages, Native American languages, Native American became substrate. Words that came from Native American are not slang or low register words, but they do come from beneath because they were conquered. So words like tomat, which became tomato, or aguacate, which became avocado, or chocolate, something like that became chocolate. Coyote, coyote. These are all substrate words in English. So when it's from slang or from immigrant language, when it's from the people we rule, it's lower register. And when it's from the people who rule us, it becomes high register language. And the same thing in Hebrew, the Persian words that were that were borrowed when Hebrew was dead are high register because they were elite words. Only the elite spoke Hebrew at that time. And words that came from other languages after Hebrew was revived were immigrant words. So this is why ashkara in modern Persian means obvious, open, open to sight. And in Hebrew, when you say ashkara, it's like really. It's an adverb in Hebrew. Or balagan. Balagan came through Russian. In Persian, it's balachane. Bala is up, khane is house. The upper part of the house is where all the mess is. And it came through Russian, where it was a high stage where they used to do a mess in marketplaces. Or another possibility is because they threw things from the balconies. Balachane, balcony, the upper part of the house, on people downstairs. And balcony is actually an example of multi-source neologism, which is another thing we wanted to talk about. Actually, multi-source neologism is a term coined by Gilad Zuckerman, our friend. And it's when one word in a language has a few possible etymologies, and maybe they're all true etymologies and just came together to mean this thing, because balcony can also be from the bulks that hold it, and balachane together.
So we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left. I want to loop back to the title of this talk, because you mentioned that in Hebrew, you wouldn't call this talk, Pajamas Pardes or something like that.
Right.
What's the title in Hebrew? And in a nutshell, what are the key points that you try to get across when giving that lecture?
Okay. When I give the point that we're all the same and the other side is human too, and the differences are cool, or as we say in Hebrew, cool, or the linguistic points.
Both.
Okay. The Hebrew lecture is called Ashmedai HaChantarish. Ashmedai is the king of demons, and I bring him because it's both the cultural influence and the linguistic influence. And Ashmedai, the demons in Persian are called, in Iranian, are called present day Div, in Avestan, their holy language of about 3,000 years ago, Daiwa. And the Daiwa, the demons, are all the bad feelings we have. So anger and sorrow and death and menstruation. That's a female demon. And old age and disease, everything is a demon. So actually right now, Corona is like a big demon. But the demon that was borrowed into Hebrew is Aishmadaiwa, the demon of wrath. And he's not the worst demon. So why was he borrowed into Hebrew, Aishmadaiwa, and not another demon? Because they have quite a lot. Can you guess why it's Ashmedai who was borrowed into Hebrew and not other demons?
They could pronounce it?
They can pronounce it, that's one thing. But it also sounded similar. It's another, it's what it's right, shmad, the root shmad in Hebrew. It's a sort of multi-source neologism, a specific sort that's called phono-semantic matching. You match the phonology, Ashmedai, Aishmadaiwa, and the semantics, the meaning of shmad, because that's which means to destroy, which is what demons do. Phono-semantic matching is another term that was coined by Gilad Zuckerman.
So this may also help to account for the multiple comments that I've received, still pushing back on your etymology of pardes, because after all, isn't the word pre, a natural Hebrew word? Might that be another case of?
It is. Pardes is not related to pri. It's not related to pri. It's related to paridaisa, And we only see it in biblical books from after we came in touch with Iran. There are two tests to decide if a word is original in Hebrew or a Persian loanword when there's competition. In Pardes, there's no competition. How would you account for the this? But one is, does it have a plausible etymology in Hebrew? And the other one is, do we see it before we went to exile? And you don't see Pardes before we went to exile, and it has a much more plausible etymology in Persian, and we know the word from Persian, and we know it was borrowed into many languages. So yes.
So let me go back to your title. Ashmedai, all right. What's a Chantarish? That's not a word I learned in day school.
I know, maybe Meron can help me with Chantarish too. It's someone who's not serious. And in Persian, rish, beard, is a symbol of seriousness. And chande means laughter. So if you're chande rish, you either make fun of or don't respect your own beard, or rishchand ka'adan in Persian, to do rishchand is to mock someone's beard. So it's someone whose beard is mocked or who doesn't act in accordance with the respectable beard they have. And this is actually another multi-source neologism, because there's also kandırış in Turkish that means cheating. So that could have also influenced the meaning of Chantarish. And there's also kuntarish in Arabic, which means, I think, 300 kilos of feathers. But I Googled up kuntarish, and I only found it in etymologies of Chantarish. They don't use it as something bad. I found it in Arabic only in what's heavier, a kuntar of feathers or a kuntar of iron. And we all know the answer.
So let me ask you a question to which I think there are multiple answers. In the first program of this series, Gil Chovav spoke about the grave of his great-grandfather, Eliezer ben Yehuda. Given everything that's happened to the Hebrew language over the past 100 years, do you think ben Yehuda would be rolling in his grave, or would he be smiling? Have we reinvented Hebrew, or have we invented Israeli?
Well, maybe if he heard Gilad, he would be a little bit worried. But actually, when I say dog walkerit, when I say tokbekistim, when I say ashkara, balagan, or when I say parvar and peripheria, which most people don't have to think in order to realize their loan words, I'm speaking Hebrew. That's my language. And we saw that even in biblical times, there were loan words into Hebrew. A word that doesn't evolve is a dead language. And a word and a language that has speakers who are unilingual, that's their only language, their mother tongue and their only language. There are many speakers of modern Hebrew who don't speak any other language. And even if they make mistakes, that this is somewhere I do agree with Gilad, that native speakers don't make mistakes. It's just that the laws of the language have to catch up with them. And they don't always do it in the right time. But a language that doesn't evolve is a dead language. And if Ben Yehuda heard us talking today, especially after a little bit over 100 years ago, 110 years ago, Gilad started his lecture with a quote from Theodor Nöldeke in Encyclopedia Britannica, who said that there's some attempt to revive Hebrew nowadays, but it doesn't have a greater chance than the nation, the Jewish nation returning to Israel, which was true. Would turn out to be true, but that's not he meant. Okay, Meron, we have to say Meron's comment there because he made a good comment. But I'm on a roll. I think he would be delighted because there's no precedent in the history of humankind, of a language that's been mostly dead for 2,000 years and was revived and is spoken by an exclusive language by a whole nation.
Did you want to share Meron's comment?
Yeah, Meron suggested that Chantarish would be not, he suggested worthless, but it's not exactly worthless, but feeling shitty with a not very diplomatic use of language. I think it's more about being not serious than, but you can also say it about someone who was not serious and, you know, betrayed your trust, that because he speaks nonsense.
Well, thank you very much for all of these insights. Again, to everybody who has been participating, you can find a recording of this talk as well as all of the other talks in the series on the consulate's Facebook and YouTube pages. Both of them are called Israel in Boston. Thamar, I know that you have an upcoming event. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, and Natasha reminded me to teach the accent. My next, I see that Amir is writing to everybody. My next lecture will be about the book of Esther and its connection to present day Iran. It will be in English in Bet Avichai in Jerusalem. I really like it. I love the pandemic because I can lecture in Boston, I can lecture in Jerusalem, and I don't have to wear pajamas. It will be on the 24th, and Amir will give you the link in the chat, and we'll also post it to our Facebook page.
Great. And there was a question about accents. Well,
right, because
with
I
that, we'll
said
conclude.
Yeah, because I promised to teach the accent. It's actually much easier to teach it to Americans than to Hebrew speakers. Because in Hebrew, we only have one kind of ah. We can't hear the differences between the different ahs and es and es that you Americans have. I mean, when I say we, I mean normal Israelis, not linguists who spent 4 years in the States like me. Persian has two kinds of vowels that are marked as ah. One is ah with a smile and all the teeth, ah, ah, ah. And the other is round, ah, like glove, bob, ah, ah.
Okay.
So now say ka, bob,
bob,
ka, bob,
bob,
kabob.
Kabob. Yum.
You know kabob, right?
This goes back to our restaurant theme.
This goes back to a restaurant thing, and it's actually an Arabic loan word in both languages. But I think did I see it in the States spelled with O?
Kebab in English is K-A-B-O-B. Yes.
Yeah, so that's Persian, and it means that it came to English through Persian and not directly from Arabic. So we have kebab, and I usually finish my lectures in Hebrew with the loan word zaman. Za. Mon.
Mon.
Zaman.
Zaman. Zman?
Zman. Affarin. Zman undergoes, in Old Persian, it's jaman. It undergoes phonological fusion because classical Hebrew doesn't have j. So we have z instead of j. That's phonological fusion, which we talked about. It undergoes morphological fusion, external, inflectional, like zmanim, and derivational, like zmani, temporary. Zman means time in Hebrew. And it undergoes internal morphological fusion because it's 3 letters. It fits perfectly into every structure. So we have hizmin, invited, hizdamen, happened to be in a place, zimen, summoned. So this word demonstrates all the kinds of fusion we talked about. And it actually underwent the semantic shift very early on, because it means time also in Arabic and in Middle Persian and in other languages of the area. And Jaman in Old Persian is that who goes, the same root as English come. And what does time do?
It goes.
Goes. And our time also went by so fast. I had a wonderful time. I hope you did too.
I did. Before we go, we do need to go because our time is up. There was a question. What time is your March 24th lecture?
Same time, 8 Israel time, 1 Eastern Standard Time, 1 in PM, of course, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to learning from you again in that context. Thank you again to everybody who attended this session. And once again, to all the folks at the consulate in Boston who made it happen. Have a great day.
Thank you.